are the very first cob homes. These are in England. And the word cob has no connotation with corn or nothing like that. The term cob refers to a loaf-like shape. It's an old English word. It's like cobblestone street or something like that. And traditionally, you take big lumps of this earthen mixture and place them on the wall. And then congeal it with your hands or different ways. These houses are extremely thick. The address we use go back in history. Some of you might know that straw bale architecture originated in Nebraska, just out in the panhandle of the state. The very first straw bale homes that were constructed were built out close to Alliance, Nebraska. This is potentially the very first straw bale structure, and it was constructed in 1903, abandoned in 1956, and it's still considered somewhat habitable. And it certainly could be with a little bit of care. So it's some pretty amazing Nebraska heritage, I think. A third to a half of the world's population still lives in earthen homes. And I'll transition now from history into maybe why we should start considering building with earth. Suburbia is always kind of tough for me to look at. Some of these figures speak pretty loudly for themselves. The commercial and residential building sector accounts for 39% of the carbon dioxide emissions in the States. Buildings consume a ton of energy, both in the manufacturing standpoint and what it takes to keep them heated and running. Most trees that are cut in this country are used in construction. If we substituted earth for wood in our walls, and our floors, and our finishes, and say it, excuse me on this, my notes are a little small. We could save potentially 60 to 80% of the lumber that is used in the state, and we could completely eliminate clear cutting. I've been staying out in Oregon the last few years, and I used to see the forest out there as this very majestic place. Since I've been out there and I've kind of become savvy to the way that the forest industry works out there, I've seen a lot of clear cutting, and these machines will come, people will strip entire hillsides, they'll cut the ridge lines, which is really bad for water catchment. These trees up on the ridges will kind of comb the clouds as the clouds are moving through, and that water will drop, replenish watersheds. They're experiencing very bad problems with drought right now, and it'll only get worse unless the forestry management gets better. If we used things like earth for our walls rather than wood, we could avoid a lot of this. Embodied energy is a really, really important topic to tackle, I think, here. Embodied energy, when I say this term, I mean net energy used to produce something. And so when we look at something like concrete or cement that gets used for a conventional house, and we think about how it's produced, how it's dug up from the limestone quarry, and how it's heated up and shipped from one place to another for more processing, for more packaging, all the trucks that it takes, all the gas that it takes those trucks to move this stuff from place to place, from the quarry to wherever else it's going, before it gets to your work site, there's an enormous amount of energy that's embodied in this whole system. When I build a structure, or when other people using earthen materials build a structure, you can pull materials straight from underneath your feet. You don't have this giant energy mechanism. You don't have this, this intensive use of fossil fuels and things like this to produce a very clean and livable structure. Generally speaking, too, a straw bale house, when you think about carbon sequestration and the way that trees photosynthesize, they're pulling CO2 out of the air. Same thing with straw or with the tall grass prairie. All these plants are growing, they're sequestering carbon. Straw bale houses, if built properly, or generally speaking, a straw bale house can sequester more carbon than it produces. I want to talk a little bit about earthen building versus green building. There's a very distinct difference between these two. Green buildings oftentimes use very highly embodied energy materials, things that take, like I was talking about with embodied, a lot of energy to produce. And maybe these houses save a lot on utilities because they're highly insulated. They're well designed for things like passive solar and other smart principles to actively heat and maintain the utilities inside the home. But sometimes the energy that it takes to create these mediums, these insulations and the things that they use, I've heard that it can take 20 years or so up and running before you're ever making a dent into that net energy that was put up front to create the structure, as opposed to the utilities that you're saving. Whereas something like an earthen home, that embodied energy is extremely low to begin with. natural design, we take inspiration, or we try to take inspiration from nature. She always teaches us good ways. Hummingbird nests are beautiful. Beavers, insects. All nature has a lot of different ways that I think we can learn pretty smartly from if we pay a little bit of attention. I want to throw this term in there too. Vernacular is a very important word, I think. By using local materials, we can dictate the character of a building. If I'm building with things from within a 15 or 20 or 30 mile radius of my construction site, that structure will kind of embody the nature of what's around me. And this is the way traditionally places were built. People weren't importing things from extremely far away to build their houses, their structures, and consequently the structures had this resonance where they kind of reverberated the essence of the land. And I think it's something really beautiful that maybe we should take a closer look at. Passive solar design is extremely smart and appropriate, and I think when we came to this country and we saw the abundance of materials that were here, we saw the forests, we didn't feel much need to conserve, and we had this huge resource in front of us. The natives had taken care of the land pretty well, and when we came, we just started orienting our houses whichever way we pleased, heating our homes with wood and really burning a ton of it, and slowly but surely cutting down a lot of the forest. With basic things like orienting to the sun, which all cultures used to do, we can save enormous amounts of energy. And the main principle here is watching the sun slowly rise in the summertime and then sink back down on the southern horizon when we're in the northern hemisphere. This would be flipped on the opposite if we were in the southern hemisphere. But just angling the pitch of your roof or the eaves of your roof, and say, I don't know, maybe late April, early May, around that time it starts to get hot around here, you might want to start blocking that sun out of your house. So you look at the horizon and you measure, you can calculate exactly where the sun is going to be on, say, the 30th of April, and you can design your roof eave so that it blocks out the sun from that day on, and that any time past that, in the winter, the sun starts coming into your house, heating you up, and then by the time summer is rolling around again, you're essentially blocking yourself from that. It's extremely smart principles to get back to. And it brings us into talking about insulation and thermal mass. I talk a lot about cob construction. It's beautiful. It's something that I'm pretty obsessed with. Straw bales are really smart to build with around here. They insulate a lot. Our winters are very cold. If you built a structure that was primarily thermal mass, you think about concrete, you think about water, you think about these things that take a really long time to heat up, and that storage of energy. And and so it would be really smart design to maybe put a big thermal mass on your south wall where it's getting a lot of sun exposure, and then maybe insulating with straw bales around the rest of your house. So you've got this thermal mass, it's slowly heating up, it's absorbing a lot of that sunlight, it's resonating that heat back into your home, and the rest of that heat is remaining inside because it's insulated. Insulation buffers you from the outside environment, and things like thermal mass can make it an extremely uncomfortable situation if you live in a cold place. Traditionally, the big adobe homes and things that were built down in the desert had extremely thick walls, so over the course of the summer, the walls would slowly be absorbing all this heat. And then as they get into winter and the months start to get cooler, that home still has that high thermal mass, and it's that thermal inertia, and it's slowly releasing that heat back into the home. And by the time spring rolls around and your kind of battery has deprived itself from all that heat it stored the previous summer, then it's starting to recollect it again for the following year. So it makes sense to build very massively in certain places. It makes sense to build very insulative in other places. And with smart design, we can save a lot of energy. This is Simon Dale's greenhouse. He's got a lot of really amazing structures. He's definitely a bit of an inspiration. But this is just basic technique of, a south-facing greenhouse, and you can grow food in that area. You've got these thick walls that are absorbing all that sun, and then the rest of his house is highly insulated. And these walls act as that thermal battery, so they're releasing that heat into your home. Sure.
Well, how long does that work? I mean,
how well does it work?
You actually can store it for the summer, for the entire winter, is that what you're saying?
In certain regions. It depends on your region. If you were someplace like the desert Southwest, absolutely. If your walls are thick enough.
Yeah, but if you're in Nebraska, you couldn't.
If you're in Nebraska, you couldn't.
Yes, you're right.
No, but with a design like this, and with good passive solar and making sure that your eaves are right and that you're letting through a lot of southern sun exposure on this side, these walls will heat up in the winter still, just like your greenhouse heats up, and these walls will keep that heat. A lot of people around here that have greenhouses have big barrels of water in the greenhouse so that they're absorbing that heat and kind of buffering extreme temperature change. And this is the exact same principle, it's just building it into your house. Does that answer?
Well, you can put all kinds of water wherever you want, but when it's below zero, it's still gonna freeze.
Not if it's soaked. The water will freeze when it gets below zero, but if it's soaked up the heat during the day, then it's not going to get to zero.
But if it drops below zero, if it's zero during the day, it's still gonna freeze. I'm not gonna lie.
Maybe. That's debatable.
Maybe. You tell me maybe. I know this because I live outside.
I'll talk to you about it afterwards.
Yeah.
So just like we have these designs to passively heat and cool our homes, this is an auxiliary cooling method. It's a very basic design for a solar chimney, and you can paint the top of this black to really increase the draw on it. Have some cold air influence coming in. Hot air gets drawn in, cools down from the earth, gets pulled into your house, and as air is getting pulled out, the hot air of your house is getting pulled out, you're pulling in cold air. Basic way to cool your house in the winter. Auxiliary heating, something that I've been really interested in lately are the rocket stoves, thermal mass heaters, and these work on an extremely smart fuel burning principle, where the firewood burns from one end like a lit cigarette. All smoke is unburnt fuel. If you learn how to burn all that smoke before it leaves your house, you are essentially creating a cleaner burn, for one, and when you run the flue through a thermal mass like a cob bench or a stone bench, then you can use that as a battery and store your heat in the system. By the time the gases exit this system, they only range in about 200 degrees Fahrenheit. So essentially, rather than sending all your heat straight up and out of your chimney, this encapsulates the chimney inside the system, and the draw is so strong, the pull is so strong, and the burn so complete, up to 2,000 degrees, and then you can store all that heat inside your home before leaving. And make really nice, warm, smart day beds and things. A lot of cultures have had different designs for this over the centuries. This is a Russian design for a very similar clean burn and a big thermal mass that stores it all. My friend who I worked with down in Argentina built this one. This is a great book to get into as far as design principles are concerned. I won't talk about it too much right now, but just because I want to keep this moving, but highly recommended. I'm going to talk about materials and techniques now for a little while. French drains, it's really important that you keep your earthen medium disconnected from the earth. If your earth is touching other earth, it's going to want to turn back into earth, so you have to disconnect it. Keeping it dry with a good roof and a good foundation is the most critical thing you can do for keeping a structure surviving for a very long time. I build with French drains. These save a lot of concrete. 60 cubic yards on average go into today's average house. And with this design principle, you don't necessarily have to dig all the way down to the frost line. The frost line is like 3 feet deep here. It's really tough to dig that by hand, or I guess you should probably get a machine. But when you're digging it, you dig so deep because frost heaving will slowly uplift your foundation. The thawing and freezing of the land will cause it to uplift. With the round river rock that we use, there's so many small capillary breaks, and we angle this whole trench down so that water, if it does get into the foundation, goes down through the drain, drains away. Really popular, it was popularized by Frank Lloyd Wright, I believe. But it saves a lot of concrete. It's amazing drainage, and going back to the frost heaving, the small capillary breaks in it allow that if there is stagnant water in your foundation, when it freezes, it will find its way to kind of crawl through those crevices of the rock, as opposed to having something compact like road-based gravel or something like that. So they're smart for a lot of reasons. Foundations, you can use all sorts of things for your foundations. Stone, a term that was, I think, coined by natural builders is urbanite, using old recycled concrete. You'll see big piles of concrete, people ripping up their driveways, throwing that stuff away all over the place. It's an amazing resource to be able to harvest, pick up, repurpose, keep it out of the landfill, build your foundations on that. Brick, cement, questionable. Earth bags, I'll talk about those in a little bit. Tires, Yeah, maybe tires. The earthen mixture, this is the basic. You need a sharp sand. If you use something like a round sand, it has no cohesion. The sand is the strength and the structure of this system. Clay is the binder that we usually use, and then fiber. These are the same components that you'll find in concrete, an aggregate, a binder, and a fiber. So what we are producing is a natural concrete. These can be substituted for different things, your binders, your fibers. There's all sorts of different things that can bind your mixture together if you're savvy. Stone, this is one of the oldest and most intuitive natural materials. It's easy to get code approval. It's withstood the test of time amazingly well. It's often available for free if you're in a place with a lot of stone. Out here, you're going to have to pay. So it might not be your best option, but at the same time, the limestone quarries around here might provide a good source of foundation material. They have also strong thermal inertia, like I was talking about with the cob, slowly heating up and cooling down. Cob, this is probably the shining star of the natural building movement because of its sculptural attributes. You can sculpt your walls free form. This is like Adobe, but it's put on the walls wet, and you're able to sculpt with it as you go, and it dries into a hard mass. It's load bearing. You can lay a roof directly on this, which is pretty incredible too. It can save a lot of timber that way. The mix is sand, straw, and clay. Sand, the aggregate, clay, binder, and straw, the fiber. I'll show you a few pictures of some cob houses because I love them. This one's a Goatling house in Sussex, England. Beautiful sculptural work, I think. Some interiors of some places. You're really artistically liberated when building with cob. You can really sculpt whatever shapes and greens that you have. Bedroom. This is cob. C-O-B. Cob is a mixture of sand, clay, and straw. And it's very sculptable, load-bearing, really good for sculpting things like little niches. You can sculpt out places for your dishes, candle niches, whatever you want, stairwells. This is a living room, cob living room. Cob bathroom. Going on to Adobe's. Adobe's the exact same consistency and ingredients as cob is, but it is formed into bricks and sun-dried so that you can build a lot in one day. One of the downfalls of cob is you can only build so high in one day before it gets too heavy because you're putting it on the wall wet. You need to wait for it to dry. You can build maybe 10 inches a day or so, and anything above that, as you put it on, it will just kind of slough off. So you have to hang out, wait for it to dry. When you've already pre-dried your materials as Adobe's or things like that, it's very quick, fast, easy to stack up. They can be mixed by foot, animal, or machine. It's a lot of fun mixing cob or Adobe mediums. Oftentimes you get a group of people together, you throw down your clay and your sand and some water, and you dance in it. And you mix it up with your feet, and it can be an amazing communal building. I foresee myself having wall raisings and hiring, bluegrass bands and buying beer and getting everybody to mix my walls for me.
Got a question now.
Sorry.
Sure.
How long does the cob stay sculptable? Like, how long do you have to make it into what you want?
Well, you can also do a lot of sculpture on the exterior of it. So I'll get into plasters in a little bit, but it depends on the detail of sculpture. For larger shaped things, you're going to want to know your design as you're building it. You're going to want to have that kind of pre-planned out. But as far as smaller things, I can come into my straw bale house and cut out with a knife or a saw little holes into the straw bale and then mold those.
Add on to it.
Yeah, or you can wedge sticks in the wall or things like that you can use as lath later to attach this medium onto and continue to sculpt that way. And as you come out finer and finer, you start to use things like horse manure rather than straw. And that still gives you a lot of play if you're just looking to do detailed work or artistic murals, things like that. Sculpture that's maybe this thick as opposed to your house sculpture. Yeah, if you don't have, it depends on your climate too. If you're building in a really dry place like the desert, the next day when you come back to your building site, everything that you did the night before might be bone dry.
But you can do like the functional part first and then like make it aesthetically cool.
Exactly. but the curves in your walls and things, you're totally liberated from the box, which is amazing, because it is a load-bearing medium. You can lay the roof directly on it. And so you can do things like circular structures, you can do curved walls, which also make a lot of sense when you think about seismic activity and earthquakes. You think about holding up a piece of paper on edge, it'll fall over. You take that same piece of paper and you bend an S into it, and all of a sudden it has a lot more strength and stability. Giving curves to your walls makes a lot of sense, not just aesthetically, but structurally. So these are some examples of some adobe houses. House building. And straw bale. So, like I said, straw bale architecture originated in Nebraska, and we actually have the privilege of having a technique named after us, Nebraska-style Nebraska-style straw bale. And this is the load-bearing straw bale. You can also lay roofs directly onto straw bales. You don't need a stick frame structure for it. They are load-bearing, and the new code even brings that further into light, which I'll talk about in a minute. You can use straw grains for these. They include oats, wheat, flax, rye, other cereal grains. You don't want to use things with a really hard woody stem, things that snap easily. You want the flexible cereal grains because they allow. So pretty much in adobe and cob, the straw acts as the rebar inside, so to speak, where it's this fiber that's running continuously through it. When you're putting the mix on the wall with cob, you're using your thumbs to sink this straw down into this kind of three-dimensional web of straw inside your structure. So it holds together very well for things like earthquakes and things. Straw is the natural builder's best friend. As far as insulation is concerned, it's unmatched. It's important to remember. If you put hay in your walls, you've got a decent chance of it rotting. It has seeds and woody stems, things that don't necessarily insulate and have a higher chance that if they are experienced or exposed to slight moisture, your hay will rot much quicker than your straw. Your straw is a little bit more forgiving in that manner. And like I said at the very beginning, for some of you that may have missed it, it's really important that these walls be able to breathe the whole way through. You are going to have moisture sucked up from the ambient humidity of your structure moving through the wall, and it's important for that moisture to be able to get out. Nebraska style, this is an example of the old Nebraska style where you were required to run rebar through your walls and a roof plate. One of the things about Nebraska style straw bale is when you put the roof on all these bales, they're pretty well compressed, but there's still a little bit of compression that's going to be seen when you put a 2-ton roof on your structure. And so this will cause the bales to settle ever so slightly more, but you want to make sure that they're either pre-compressed or afterwards you plaster. Don't plaster beforehand, otherwise it's going to crack. They used to require you to run rebar through your walls down to a cement bond beam at the bottom. And this was a method that you could threaded rebar, you could kind of crank and levy down these roof plates so that they would hold the walls strong and tight. And with the new straw bale code, you don't need these anymore. And actually, like I was saying, with moisture breathing through the walls, when you do things like run metal through your walls, that metal is going to want to condensate that moisture that's being produced on the inside of the house. So conventional engineers looked at this problem, and they think that running rebar through the walls is a smart way to make sure that the bales stay strong, but actually it was giving them more of a chance to rot. So this has been fixed. Post and beam is the other method. You can frame out your house and then just stick your straw bales in as insulation. Potential for retrofitting is there, existing structures, but there is a better way to do that too, which I'll talk about here. Straw clay, this is just a mix of liquid clay slip and straw, and you kind of stir it up, you toss it like a salad, and then it gives you this medium that you can stuff into the space, the cavity between existing rafters or studs in your wall. And you have these kind of plywood forms that you're taking, you're stuffing it down, you unscrew these forms, move them up, and then you're left with a wall that looks like this. And this is something that I think should be very closely looked at for the retrofitting of current houses. There's a lot of people talking about retrofitting as far as saving utilities and things like that right now. And when you look at some of the materials that they're using for insulation in these retrofits, they spray some really nasty and toxic stuff on it. Some stuff that acts as flame retardant. When you're blowing in a bunch of insulation in your ceiling, something really light, loose, and fluffy, it's going to want to it's ignitable, it's very flammable, so they have to spray some strange things on there. I've learned more doing natural construction than I ever wanted to about the toxicity of drywall, of fiberglass insulation, about the things that we live in. And I think this could be an amazing way that we can quickly and safely insulate houses better. It's code approved.
Jim, you got a question?
Oh, excuse me.
When you're putting that's a liquid, you're saying you're mixed that stuff together. What happens about mold? Is there something there that's killing any possibility of mold?
If you live in a very humid, well, first of all, you probably shouldn't start this during a rainy season. I wouldn't do this project here in March or April or maybe even May. I would wait until it was hotter, drier, it had a quicker chance to dry out. This will dry out fairly quickly because it's exposed on both sides and the air movement will dry the surface and then the moisture on the inside will move to the outside and continue to dry. You can speed this up by fans, by things like that if you really are in a desperate situation. Or if mold does become a problem or you're building in a place like maybe Alaska or the tropics where you're bound to get a lot of moisture, you can amend it with things like borax or you can spray it with hydrogen peroxide. There are natural fungicides that you can use to keep the mold down. But it is an issue and it should be definitely considered when building with this stuff. Yeah, like I was saying, this is ideal for retrofitting, I believe. It's very quick, very easy. Walls can go up in a day if they're already framed. It's just have a work party, get folks over, and you can get it done quickly, as opposed to something like cob, which takes a lot longer. These are some examples of EcoNest. They're a company based out of Ashland, Oregon, close to where I'm living. They do amazing work with natural mediums and kind of appealing them to a more conventional setting. Some of the pictures I show you of cob and things like that are the very artsy thing that I'm into, and there is a natural medium for everybody, I believe. And so these are some more conventional looking homes that EcoNest does. I really like their work. I'll talk about roofing too, but you can use things like tin for rain catchment or steel. This is the inside of one of the EcoNests. Very conventional, but they use timber framing too, which I have a slide on here. Wattle and daub, just real quick primer on this one. You probably heard the term before. This is just weaving sticks together and then using an earthen medium to kind of layer on the outside. Quick, you can do small things like children's play structures or I don't know, small projects it's pretty good for, or even it used to be widely spread as a design, but it doesn't really insulate well. So depending where you're building, how comfortable you want to be, it might not be your best option, but it is one of the oldest and most historic. Cordwood is an interesting one. I don't know too much about it. I haven't had any experience building it, but the basics are you use wood as infill in your wall, and you can use cement or cob or a different earthen medium, and you leave a gap in between, which you then stick something like sawdust or insulation into. You end up using a lot less cob than your standard wall, which can save you a lot of time. It can dry faster, and the insulation is still pretty good. It's quick to build. It's also fire resistant, believe it or not, just because there's not really room for air circulation in there. Timber framing, this is framing with wood without using hardware. So you're cutting male and female pieces into the wood, mortise and tenons, and then connecting these with wooden pegs, driving them together. It's a very natural way to take, it can be done with round wood or with timber, excuse me, milled lumber. The earth bags are really interesting. Cal Earth is the place that pioneered this. They originally had grants from NASA to look at possible moon structures, and that's kind of how this style took off. But now people will lay, the first two courses will be all gravel to separate the earthen medium, and then rather than amending any of the soil, you can just take any soil that's around you, despite its clay or sand content, load it up into these bags and pile them and coil them like a pot. It's pretty cool. They stand up extremely well in earthquakes, seismic activity. I imagine they do well in tornadoes and things like that. But I'm not sure about the roofing in a place that experiences a lot of rain. A lot of these are being built out in California in a lot drier places where the rain runoff is going to hit and cruise off pretty quickly. In a place like this or other places that might have longer periods of rain, it might not be the smartest building choice. But it is, the bags are made of polypropyl plastic, so it's it's one of those things. I mean, it all goes back to what you want to define as natural. If the majority of the mass of this structure is natural, I don't know. I mean, I use broken concrete in my structures. I use glass. I'll use salvage glass windows, and those things are all, you know, conventionally produced. But there are smart ways, I think, to go about using these conventional materials if we have our heads in the right spaces. But these are the same. Those are the same as the bags that sand comes in that you load into the back of your pickup.
Right?
I was gonna ask what, are you, I'm sorry, I couldn't like that.
No, please.
The earthship that they're building like out of Santa Fe, is that the same as, is that what the cow, is the cow house is all the same?
No.
Or, okay.
And I'm probably not the best person to talk to if you're really interested in an earthship, because I've got some views about them that conflict with a lot of people that are obsessed about them. Michael Reynolds has on the front of his website, "The earthship is the epitome of sustainable design and construction. No part of sustainable living has been ignored in this ingenious building." And I think that might be a little pompous. He uses cement. He berms his houses into the hillside, which can be smart, but it depends where you're building. He spreads this all over the planet. It would not make sense, I don't think, to build an earthship in northern Minnesota, berming into a hillside where the hill is a somewhat constant temperature, but if you don't like sleeping in 50-degree weather, it might not be your best choice for housing. It's going to take a lot of auxiliary heating. It takes a lot of conventional material to keep yourself separated. But like I was saying with earth, it's really important that you separate yourself from earth. If you're berming into the side of a hill, you're going to have a lot of issues with moisture buildup. You're going to need things like vapor barriers. You're going to need more plastic in your house. They berm themselves in with rubber. I've heard mixed reviews about tires off-gassing certain toxic things that you might not necessarily want to live in. He builds with a lot of trash, which is admirable. It's cool. It's a great solution if you're by a landfill or you're trying to get rid of all this trash that's around you. It's better than burning it, but he uses a lot of cement and a lot of vapor barriers. And I know that when my house erodes, if it's no longer inhabitable, I like to imagine it just turning back into earth. And I imagine these things, I just don't know how I feel about living in trash. I don't know how I feel about berming into hillsides. I don't know about taking this technology to other countries where they already have amazing vernacular architecture, say Africa or South America, where they've been building with earth forever, and then they bring this design like, hey, here's a good idea. But they already have implemented amazing. They should be proud of their heritage, I feel. But those are my views. I think they do deserve mention. I think the guy is doing some good work out there, but I also wanted just a small space to express that he might not be the complete answer. Going back to finishing techniques, I kind of did foundations, drainage, getting closer to the end here. Talk about plasters real quick. These are the skin of the structure. My teacher always called it dropping the curtain. So you come and you plaster from the top, and you've got things like straw bales or a really rough cob mixture, and all of a sudden in one day it just transforms into this beautiful, smooth structure. It's a pretty amazing feeling. This is a photo I took at Aprovecho where I was, and it kind of shows the breakdown of the lath in the wall. The first coarse layer, finer and finer as you come out. So you're using the exact same material, sand, straw, and fiber, or excuse me, sand, clay, and fiber, but you'll start to use finer sand, and you will start to use finer fiber. You'll start to use things like horse manure or other things like that, chopped straw. Roofing, there's a bunch of options for roofing. I love the reciprocal roofs. They were Leonardo da Vinci design as far as spanning huge spaces on some of these old cathedrals and things without lumber that was that long. So they found ways to stack the lumber. And with this system, you stack one stick on top of another, going all the way around until the last one fits under the first. So each stick is supported by the one preceding it and supporting the one after it. I think it's a pretty cool design. People use thatch. You might have to replace your thatch every 15, 20 years, but it's a complete natural way to do it. Otherwise, if you're doing something like a living roof, you'll probably have to put on rubber pond liner or membrane, something non-natural. But when you look at longevity of the structure, is it worth it to invest in something like a pond liner for your roof? The energy that it takes if you might not have to redo your roof for 300 years. Tin or steel, you want to think maybe about water collection if you're living off the grid. There's certain things that will be better for that, certain high embodied materials that might make sense to use. Earthen floors, they're beautiful, they're strong. Don't build with them in places that don't get sunlight. They will always be cold. Nobody likes cold feet. You should probably build with wood or at least highly insulate them, or you can run radiant heat through them too. If you've got a conventional house or something, you want to do some retrofitting with it, you want an earthen floor in a room, you can hook up basic PEX piping or something like that to your water heater, run hot water through your floor so it's always warm. It's pretty nice. Otherwise use wood, tile, something like that. Really quick, disaster. Fire resistance, all these things are earth, they don't really burn. They handle extremely well. You'll see houses in Arizona where wildfires move through and burn everything in the area, and the straw bale house is still standing unscathed. They've gone through tons of tests, which is part of why they have new code written for them now. Straw bales, believe it or not, do not burn. They might scorch on the outside a little bit, but they're too dense. The example that was always given to me was, imagine trying to light a phone book on fire. When you tear out each individual page of that phone book, it's extremely flammable. It's a very flammable thing like straw is, but when it's compact, there's not much room for air, and all fire needs fuel, it needs oxygen to burn. So with the compact nature of the straw bales, you're not going to see a big fire risk with these at all. Earthquake resistance. There are straw bale structures going up like crazy in Haiti now post-earthquake because they handle so well. Straw bale houses were put on shake tables, and the maximum, what is that, Geiger? No, Geiger's radiation. The seismic scale, they were able to crank up to, I think twice, it was at least 1.5 or twice.
Richter.
Yeah, the Richter scale. They were able to crank it up 1.5 times the most intense earthquake ever measured, and the straw bale house held up fine. Shook a little bit and maybe a couple cracks in the plaster. They're amazing for earthquakes. I imagine they do extremely well in tornadoes too, especially if you got kind of a rounded structure. The cob is also really good for earthquake resistance. Most of the natural mediums are. Adobe a little less so because it's not as monolithic. It's all those individual pieces put together. It will still hand up to certain earthquakes, but not as well as cob or straw bale. Strength of cob. I think that photo speaks for itself.
Wow.
The base is cob, and it experienced a crack about this big, hairline fissure. Building codes, real quick, I'll talk about. There is no building code for cob written in the USA. There are certain structures in parts of Canada that have gotten code approval for building with cob. Some counties have no code. A lot of places in Missouri, there's like Dancing Rabbit Eco Village down there, and they do a lot of natural construction. One of the closer places nearby that does it. And they can get away with building whatever they want because there's no inspectors or officials to come in and tell them what they're doing. I think it's really smart if you are building outside of code to know code so that you know what you're doing. If you're building a house for somebody, you need to make sure that that house is going to be safe, not collapse on them. I'm not advocating going against code, but I am advocating being able to build with materials that we know are safe and being able to take that into your own hands and kind of know what you're doing. That being said, it does carry a weight of responsibility that shouldn't be taken lightly. There are counties that restrict maximum size. The structure that I'm building right now in Oregon is 200 square feet. That's the biggest structure that I can build without needing code approval. So it's a little bit of a rogue structure. As long as it's not inhabited permanently, it will be fine. If I plumb water into it or hook up utilities to it, it could be considered a full-time residence. And there have been stories about houses being knocked down that were built illegally. This structure has a petition going around right now to save it. This is in outside of the Lammas Eco Village in England, and this house is under threat of demolition because the owner built it without checking with the code inspectors first. So it's a beautiful house. It might be demolished. There is new IRC straw bale code that was passed in October of last year, 4 months ago. This is very exciting news for people in the natural building field. People have been pushing this for 20 years now, even longer. This new code really liberates a lot. It allows it to be brought to the masses, I think. And it's going to be a lot easier to obtain financing for building a home. One of the beauties of these homes is they're often it's not rocket science to be able to learn how to do these. There could be a lot more owner-built homes. People won't have to take out mortgages necessarily to pay for this kind of extravagant house. You can take a workshop, month-long workshop, learn how to build your own house, build it for materials, 10,000, 15, depends what you're doing, where you're building, it all depends. But the new straw bale code is extremely exciting, and it goes into effect January of next year.
What's IRC?
IRC is International Residential Code, which is funny that they call it international because it's only national, but we have funny names for things sometimes. And then it is looking at there's people pushing next year in 2015 for the IBC, which is the International Building Code, which expands beyond residential. This is for passage for 1 and 2 family dwellings, but a modest size house on a city lot can now be code approved with straw bale, without concrete. You can do dry stack stone foundations, probably earthen roofs and things like that, so it's pretty exciting.
Is that just suggested, or is that actually, like, does that have to be approved by each individual jurisdiction? Or does that apply?
So this makes it a lot easier for code inspectors in your county to approve it. When other people have already gone through the tests of how does this handle earthquakes? How does this handle fire? How does it handle moisture? When all these things are taken into consideration and it's being built successfully in other places, it's going to be a lot easier. No, there's no guarantee you're going to get an inspector to sign off on it for you, but it's probably a lot easier to do so. And especially as more and more are built, I think there's a lot of potential for the movement to grow. Just a few questions to wrap up here pretty quick. Like I was saying, this is the mixture. This is me building a small earthen oven at a music festival this winter, or this summer. Kids love it. How much will my house cost and how long will it take me? The short answer is it depends. It definitely depends. Depends how savvy you are about scavenging your building material. Are you finding things near you? Are you paying? Are you still going to Home Depot and buying lumber to stick frame your house? Are you using cob? What's the clay content of your soil like that's underneath your foundation? Is it high in clay? Is it high in sand? What are you going to need to import? Do you know a farmer that will give you a cheap price on a bunch of straw bales? What length are you going to go to salvage windows from places like the Habitat Restore or things like that? Or are you going to go buy conventional windows? All these things can be taken into consideration. Your house can cost $200. It can cost $500,000. You know, on average, I'd say this house was built by Linda and Leonto Evans, which are the people that brought the cob movement to the States back in the 1980s. And they run Cobb Cottage Company up in Oregon. They're the most notorious place for teaching cob construction. They built this as a demonstration house for $8,000 that could be built by a couple, a man and a woman, in 8 months in one building season if they quit their jobs and devoted this time to do it. $8,000 to build an 800 square foot house. There's always flexibility. This 800 square foot. It's small, but it's ample. And when you build a small home, it might motivate you to spend more time outside anyway. How hard is it to install conventional utilities? It's not at all. You can lay conduit directly into mud, into cob, into running the adobe wall before you plaster it. Straw clay walls, it's very easy. But if you are doing things like straw bales, it might make more sense to run your plumbing through the floor and then up to your appliance. Just in case there was a leak or something like that, your straw bales do have the chance to rot if they're exposed to a lot of moisture. Whereas something like cob, you can rehydrate, chip away with a chisel or something like that, fix the plumbing, and then replaster over it. Very basic technique. Oh, I forgot to tackle too how long will it take me? I wanted to mention this too really quick because I think it's important to take into consideration. Sometimes when I tell people what I'm doing, they are surprised by how long it takes to build one of these structures. But I raise the question that you should think about where the materials are coming from that you're building your conventional house out of. When you think about the steps that it took to mill the lumber and the time that it took to mill that, the time that it took to extract the gypsum from the earth to make your drywall, to make the fiberglass insulation, all these conventional things, when you look at the net amount of time that it took to do those things, I'm not spending any more time doing this. It's a lot more labor intensive because I'm doing the work. but it's a lot more fulfilling, and it's non-toxic. I'm working with things like clay, which actually detoxify me as I'm building, as opposed to exposing myself to who knows what's in the drywall. Utilities, easy to install. How long will the structures last? I think I already tackled that. Good. They always use the analogy of good hat and good boots. You have your foundation uplifted off the ground so it's not connected. You've got a good roof with decent eaves so the driving rain isn't deteriorating your house. These things will last forever. You can, and the nice thing about them too is they're built out of things that are around the land. If your house is starting to rot, you can go dig up a little bit more mud next to you and throw it back on the wall. These things aren't hard to do. They can be easily maintained over the years, and if properly maintained and lived in, they are heirlooms. They'll last centuries. Some starter projects, if you're interested in doing some things on a small scale, these were the first two projects that I started with, were earthen ovens and cob bench. Just to get the feel for the medium, it's nice to do something small like this. If you guys are interested in learning more about what I'm doing, I've got a sheet of paper here I'll pass around, and I can take down emails. I can notify you when I'm in the area. I'm going to be teaching a couple workshops this summer, one for the rocket stove and one for a bench earthen oven combination, and I can give you a basic introduction to what it's like to work with this material if you're interested. Or I'm happy always to talk with you, to give you more references, resources. I love this stuff, it's my passion, and I'd really love to spread this, so if anybody has any more interest, please feel free to contact me at any point in time. These are some of my friends and teachers that I would like to thank. And I need to give a special large thank you to Handprint Press, which supplies the DVD that I'm showing tonight for the film festival. I called my friend who helped produce it and asked if I could screen it here, and a little bit hesitantly he gave me the permission to, under the guise that I let you all know that that movie is available for sale at Handprint Press. It's an incredible documentary. It'll show you, I think with that and with Yanto's book here, The Hand Sculpted House, I think with this book and this movie that you're about to see, you won't even have to take a workshop. You can learn everything that you want to about building your own house. It's all accessible. So thank you all for your time. I appreciate it. Yeah, I'll be happy to stick around with the film. If anybody is worried about the time frame and has to get out of here sooner and really wants to talk to me, I'd be happy to talk to you downstairs. I've seen this film a number of times. It won't bother me to miss it. And at the same time, I'll hang around afterwards for a bit, and I'd love to continue the conversation with y'all if you want to. Did you have anything else before we start the movie, or should we just?
Is this your sheet?
Yeah, this is my sheet.
I'll get that started.
Okay.
You want me to?
Yeah.